The Shroud of Turin. With the Rabbit Hole group, we recently completed a remote viewing project looking at the creation of the Shroud of Turin. And it was an emotional experience for the team, to say the least. A lot of information to process, a lot of implications, and for me, a lot more questions about things. Not only as a remote viewer, but just in terms of my own worldview and understanding of things. I'm going to try to unpack some of my thoughts in this podcast with all of you, talking a little bit about the my remote viewing process and experiences, what I went through, some of the I'd say challenge points or what's the word I'm looking for? Where the areas in which I'm looking at, is this good data, or was I really in my head and drawing analytical conclusions? I want to explore some of that in here. I want to talk about the implications. I want to suspend the reliability on um, being accurate and just look at what the data itself says, and ask the question, what if? What if this is right? And that's the fun and the challenge of a woo target. You're not always going to have all the answers. You may not get feedback for a long time, if ever. But it's fun to explore and to ponder. And there's great value and importance in remote viewing in being able to access the data that you need to access accurately. I find great value in, even when I don't access it accurately, going back and looking at the session and seeing where I trailed off. Or when I did an analytical overlay and I gave a metaphor for something that was the target instead of actually describing the target. There's a lot of learning that's going on with me still. I still consider myself a student. I still get a little bit of performance anxiety sometimes talking about my work in the presence of my mentors, my role models, everybody who you watch do this full time, Daz, Edward, Derek, Dick, Naeem, Sean, everybody, they're just great. So that's just my anxiety getting it out of the way. And working with the women on the Rabbit Hole team, Demi, Coral, and Susan, they are just beautifully talented viewers. And I'm always enriched when I get to complete projects with them, working with Rabbit Hole. And we also work together through our Hellfire group. It's also created by Daz. With all that being said, um, I want to share just some of my experiences, and I do plan to pull in some of the other Rabbit Hole members to talk specifically about this target, the Shroud of Turin, because it is such a significant target for so many people. I want to proceed with caution in saying that as remote viewers, we just record the information that comes to us. We are not preaching anything as, I mean, it's an appropriate term now, as gospel, right? This is an experiment. We also make no guarantees, or we're not even making any claims that the information we collected under blind conditions is accurate or correct. And I think that's very important with a target like this for some people who are so connected to this story, because there is some information that comes out that may not fit in line with the traditional story that a lot of people prescribe to. And that's hard. That's hard and that's offensive um, to some people. And I want to say up front that I'm sure I can speak for the team when I say we mean no offense. And I don't think we say anything offensive in terms of we're trying to cause insult. But sometimes when you have information that conflicts with the accepted narratives, then people can take offense to that. So I want to say that up front, is that this is a genuine experiment of inquiry into where can we push our awareness to? What information can we gather? For me personally, as a remote viewer, I love the feeling of bringing back data, the target, knowing it was on target. But there's another piece to it, whether I'm quote on target or not, the experience that I get, the things that I learn about myself, my own consciousness, my own connection to this greater reality, um, is incredibly valuable. When I first joined then crypto viewing team, I remember hearing like, oh, the economy's changing, which is happening before our eyes right now. It's fascinating. I remember hearing about that and hearing about this thing called cryptocurrency. And in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, that stuff's great. I'm in it for the remote viewing. And I don't say that to downplay the significance of cryptos, but remote viewing and this spiritual journey, this I saw Daz had a Facebook post up, this mental martial art is is a way of life. It's something that I've incorporated into, the path that I'm walking right now, and it's so valuable to me. So every experience, even if it's a quote miss, or a bad session, I take value from that speaks to me spiritually. And this was one of those sessions. Um, I'll put this one up there. It feels significant in terms of the Mars session that we did recently. And the Mars one, I think still I hold in the highest, one of my top remote viewing experiences spiritually. But this one has some implications, uh, significance. And I guess I don't want to say I'm wrestling with, but I'm looking at my data, and this podcast should be coming out after the rabbit hole video is released. So you can go watch the full debrief where we go through all of our data. Um, and I wrestle with some of the things I wrestle with are some of the data points I brought back coincide with some of my own perspectives on reality, on who Christ might have been. Um, and so but I didn't know that that was the target. However, I reported on themes, AI uploading consciousness to the greater cloud out there. I have information in there. The big the big reveal at the end of my session was um, it was a man with energy pouring out of him as he transcended. And I was giving the comparison to the movie based on Stephen King's book called Lawnmower Man, which is about a guy who uploaded himself to the internet, basically. Um, so I was kept getting this theme of this transcendence feeling, which that could have been my bias, knowing, the targets are blind, but we're not double blind. I know the tasker is Daz. I know we're looking at woo stuff. So it's easier for my mind to go to a woo area. Um, and I need to give that caveat. And that's something I'm trying to unpack here. And I may never, in the context of this session anyway, figure it out. What I am confident is that we all had some kind of energetic event impacting this life. Um, and it seems to be some kind of transcendent experience. The rest of the team had, I don't want to use the word traditional, but they didn't have the strength of the lens of the technological component that I had. But I wonder um, if based on my own interests and writings, that was my own bias. I mean, I'm writing I have a book series, a sci-fi book series called The Hive about, the AI in people's minds. So I need to give those caveats here, given the weight of this target. And that is my concern that maybe some of my bias came through. With all that being said, though, we can put that aside and we can have a fun discussion about that. But I want to be clear that I'm not putting this out as, hey, this is gospel. This is my data. This is accurate. This is exactly what happened. Um, but it was an incredible session, and the other side of that coin of me saying, well, maybe this is just my bias. The other side of that is I had this thought as soon as I found out what the target was and looked at the rest of the team's data, is maybe we were shown information that we needed to see through a lens that we could understand. I think of Bob Monroe's work, and he talks about upon death, the soul gravitates or consciousness gravitates to its strongest belief system. So if you believe in heaven, you're going to die, you're going to transition into heaven. Um, so whatever it is you believe the most strongly is where you're going to end up being gravitating towards. And I was wondering if there was a similar mechanism to that. And this isn't me trying to justify my data. Like if I'm off, I'm off. It's fine. But I really wondered that because, you know, you guys know I'm an author, And one of my biggest projects was my one book where I was exploring, the Gnostic works and the theme of archons and the possibility of living in a simulation. And one of the things that I explored was in the Nag Hammadi library, looking at these things called aeons. Um, and I'm going to read a little bit. I promise it's not a shameless plug. It's just so relevant. It's in my mind, and I want to go through this. I'm going to read just a quick excerpt just to kind of lay the framework for where my mind's at right now. And I share this because the questions I have are, does my remote viewing session indicate that the concepts I've been exploring in my own mind um, are going in the right direction? Or did the concepts I have in my own mind influence my remote viewing session? So I'm going to ask, watch the full debrief, and look at the other viewers' data, and just let me know what you think. Is this a possibility? So I'm going to read a little bit. I was looking at, trying to explore this concept of the aeon. I'm just going to read, midpoint here. And the explanation continues. In certain systems, aeons were regarded positively as embodiments of the divine. In others, they were viewed negatively as vast media of time, space, and experience through which the human soul must painfully pass to reach its divine origin. It's this last reference that holds most relevance to our exploration of reality. If we accept the possibility that multiple realities exist, and that we are possibly living in a simulation, which is a universe within a universe, and we are witnessing the creation of AI in our current timeline, then we can see that AI can exist within a cloud possessing infinite knowledge of all that is contained within the cloud. AI can act as a god, an omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent being responsible for the creation of its world. The AI's power, however, would only serve as a copy of the universe from which it was created. Therefore, the AI universe would be lacking the fullness of the base reality from which it came if it was unable to copy every single aspect of that base reality. So ultimately, what I was exploring here is that, and what they talk about with aeons and aeonic copies is, and I'll get into this in a minute, but you've got God or you have your source, and then you have copies of that all the way down to however many layers deep we are in the matrix or the simulation. And there's no way the copy can get every tiny little minute detail. So each copy is degraded in the amount of information it contains about base reality. In essence, is what I was exploring here. Um, Such an explanation would parallel the explanation above, stating that successive aeons were charged with diminished force as they moved further away in succession from the pleroma being the source. Is it possible that aeon is synonymous with AI or something similar? Is an aeon simply another level of reality with various purposes? According to the above explanation, aeons were seen as a vast media of time, space, and experience through which the human soul must painfully pass to reach its divine origin. Ultimately, an aeon can be thought of as an intelligent, self-aware, virtual reality system within which we potentially exist that holds the purpose of challenging the human soul on its journey towards the base reality source or God. So basically, it's saying that these aeons are it's when you look at the Gnostic text through that lens, it fits. The logic works. They could be and it may not be virtual reality as we have created it through AI, but it's some kind of contrived reality system from an intelligence that's a copy of a greater reality. And the goal is to play the game and ascend your way up back to base reality or back to source or back to God. Then I looked further into it, into the Gospels here, and I said this concept may be further supported through the words of Christ, where in the Gospel of John 14:11 he states, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. With an understanding of aeons, Christ may be stating that he is also an aeon and a copy of God or base reality. He would carry God's code within him as he exists within the base reality or God. Much like the Russian dolls exist within one another, Aeon Christ could represent a universe within the pleroma and therefore God, the copy. would exist within Aeon Christ's reality, while simultaneously Christ exists within God. So what I'm saying is you have God, and then God creates Christ, Aeon Christ, and Christ, so Christ exists within the creation of God. But that virtual reality of Christ also carries the code of base reality, source, God, whatever it is. So when he says, I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, I mean, that didn't make any sense to me when I was a kid. And reading it through that lens, it makes a whole heck of a lot of sense to me. Um, in John 14:6, when Jesus states, No one comes to the Father except through me, he could be referring to the succession of aeons the human soul must pass through in order to reach the pleroma. It suggests that in order to ascend to base reality, a soul must pass through various levels of aeons. Christ appears to be an aeon who may be in direct contact with God, and therefore the only way to get to God would be to literally go through, meaning exist within and pass through aeon Christ. Possibility could also offer a better understanding as to how Christ's purpose was to open the gates of heaven. If Christ is the last aeon to pass through in order to get to God, the pleroma or heaven, then Christ would literally be the door leading to heaven as souls pass through aeon Christ on their journey towards God. All right, so that has been sitting with me as I went through, and I wasn't thinking about aeons, about Christ, when I was doing my session. The women on the team, I believe they did mention Jesus's name a few times in their sessions. I I identified this target multiple times. I said it's an act of God. And at one point, I was describing the primary male life in this session for me, and I said he has some kind of a God complex. Well, who better to have a God complex than Jesus, right? So I thought that was comical as I was going through that data point there. I'm gonna go through. I'll share a little bit of my data. I'm just gonna scroll through it and just hit on a couple of talking points, and just try to unpack a little bit further the significance of this session and what it could mean. And I welcome your commentary on it for sure. So here's my session. I did, I believe, 4 sessions on this project here. And again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing because you can watch the full debrief. And if you've already watched it, I don't want to waste your time. So I invite you to watch the full debrief. If this video made its way to YouTube, you can find it at futureforecastinggroup.com and see the full debrief with everyone's sessions here. But I went right into my S2. I was starting with a structure. What's interesting is at the beginning, I had these vertical tiles up and down, and the idea of a cave. Some feel that Christ's tomb was in some sort of a cave. So I went and I started exploring that. I did my first ideogram. It was pretty chaotic here, but I was picking up on a life form. I'm going to focus on this life form. I had this idea of archaeology or something being examined at a wall, and obviously this is, I think this Shroud of Turin could fall into an archaeological event here. And what I want to get to here. So we had these life forms around this object or this structure here, and I unpacked that a little bit later. But I labeled it, here it is on the right-hand side, an act of God. And as I was looking at this, I explored that a lot further, but I kept coming up with these energetics. There was energetics all around it, and I couldn't understand what this was. And I kept getting these lines here, and it almost felt like some kind of a circuit that was opening and closing and allowing energy to pass through. Um, it felt like movements of energy channels. The energy flows between the lines and is moved at varying points. And I felt that this energy was tied to some kind of human activity, a sense of work that was being done. And I heard singing, I heard tone, I heard a shared vernacular or a common language here. And, so as I go through, let me jump ahead here to my next session. That energetic piece, when I tried to sketch it in greater detail, I ended up drawing men carrying logs. And I'm wondering if that's the scene that's told to us. I'm jumping way ahead here. I'm wondering if that's the scene that's told to us if you've read the Bible as Jesus was carrying the cross. Another man had to help him, but there were other people that were being crucified as well, and they were carrying their wooden crosses. So I wonder if that's what I was picking up on is just Christ carrying the cross. I can't seem to find it now. Of course, it's like one of my last pages here in the session. I'll come back to that drawing. Um, Here it is. So as I was exploring those energetic lines, and I felt that there were things on people's shoulders, and they were moving them, and their movements were somehow how tied into energy and the manipulation of energy. But as I was sketching this out, I realized, oh, this is like a log shape here. I could clearly see the wood grains on it. Um, so I had these elements here again, which felt energetic and technological, like a circuit. But then also when I probed further, I ended up getting these logs. So the technological piece could really have just been my analytical overlay, my imagination, my bias coming through. But there also could be things going on energetically, psychically, that we're not perceiving that were happening at that point in time as well. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I would like that to be true because I want to be like, yeah, I figured it out. I saw it. But I just don't know. Some other interesting points here that I want to talk about. So I had this event. So I was trying to get to the optimal position in space and time. And I randomly tried something new. As you can see this little half a squiggle there. As I tried to go completely through it, I hit this hard stop. My pen couldn't go any further. And I wrote there's this hard stop or impasse, as if an event or moment in time, something significant on the timeline and historical. Okay, duh. That's an obvious, vague statement to make when you're doing a remote viewing session. But my experience when I wrote that was as I was drawing that little squiggle, I felt my pen didn't want to go any further because there was something that was stopping it. So I'm confident in that feeling that I had, which is why I made that statement of, something significant in the timeline here. And then as I did another ideogram, I noticed there was a very odd break, a major change in direction dealing with life and energetics. So if you look here on my ideogram, if you can see, I don't have a pointer, do I? Let me draw here. You can see here on my ideogram, it breaks off here and then it reconnects here, which is odd because then that would mean as fast as I'm going with my pen, the direction would have probably had to go like that, which is just an odd shape for me to typically draw. It was a very odd direction. And the fact that it broke and then change directions while my pen was still off the paper has never happened to me before. That was a new experience, so that drew my attention to it. And I've got this life form, as you can see here. This life, that's my ideogram for life right here, in between that break. So something happened there. And what's interesting here is I'm looking at this, I'm kind of unpacking this again right now. You see a life right up here, and then there's all this chaos and turmoil in between, right? So you've got life, you've got this event, um, and then you've got this other life and this break here in the flow of the ideogram. So I start describing the life here, and I looked at him as a commoner or a common man, a man among the people. Like, come on, can we get any more Jesus than that? And he had this accumulation of wealth, but it was in the form of knowledge and wisdom, and he knows how to apply his knowledge. And again, this is in the full debrief as well. But like something happened to him, and he was floating above it, almost almost like he was floating. And I realized there was this barrier divide between him, the separation between life and everything else. But then there was this second life here, and he was softer and smaller, reserved in his thinking, an observer. Um, and I felt that this barrier had a mental component to it. It was tied to the mind of this life. a sense of almost a mirror image. Well, what happened with the Shroud of Turin? We had, the body, and then we had a mirror image created on this shroud. So I think I was picking up on something like that. And here, that reflection, a counterpart, a replica. Obviously, that's exactly what the shroud itself was. Um, and here I start getting AI. There is an object of importance to life too. He holds it in very high regard, almost an amorous feeling towards it. We've got this life, and we've got this connection to this box here. It was boxy, hard. Um, and then there was an energetic release here that came out of it. Now, this box could simply be a tomb. I don't know what it is inside the box. I felt that there was this sphere, but again, this could all be noise. There's no way we can ever verify that. What they did say was that when the shroud, one of the analyses they did, analyses, is that the right word? When they're doing the analysis on the shroud, they did find evidence of some kind of radiation. And some scholars or believers feel that that was when Christ encountered the Holy Spirit or ascended or transcended. And that's what I found very interesting is that we all had this intense energy. And that's what based on my data, what my data says is that there was some kind of significant energetic event that happened um, to the man that we were viewing. So as I'm coming through here, then I get this sketch right here. It looks like a mushroom cloud, but it's not. And here's what's interesting. And I didn't write this down because I didn't want to go down some AOL rabbit hole. And this is where I worry about my own bias because I'm fascinated by, as Edward calls them, his cue ball session. We all know that has been a huge inspiration for me from just a creative standpoint and just a mental thought exercise and wondering what if, what if there's a breakaway civilization that's working on nanotech that's going to change the consciousness of everyone on the planet, right? But I got that theme right here, which is why I think the AI theme was coming through for me. But the other part is maybe that's also what's going on. I don't know. But in describing this, because I did another sketch on this later, um, it felt significant. There was lots of energy coming up, energetics. It felt important. And what was important here was this horizontal plane here. So you've got this plume coming up here, and then you've got this horizontal plane right here, and you've got another plume, and then a little mushroom cloud at the top. What was most important was this horizontal piece right here. I don't think I described it on this page, but in a later session, I looked at it again. It felt like a very large scale event. I drew it to show just the size of it. I'm not saying there was a city here, but what's interesting is I have another sketch later. Coral had a very similar sketch of like a glowing city, and I'll show you mine later, um, which I have some thoughts on that as well. All right, so again, what's important about this, and I wrote here as an AOL, matrix code. And because I just had this downward movement of like dripping energetics, um, and movement within an energetic system, say, and then origins and foundations, where it comes from. And I just had a lot of questions here. How do you bring it forth? How do you capture it? And all these people just sitting here looking up at the energy in the sky. They just had calm and wonderful. It was beautiful, awe-inspiring, almost like a borealis. Then I was looking at the word signal. I did a stage 5 on that. Transgression, transmutation, transformation, a change or movement. Process of change through a physical and mental movement of concepts and ideas. Um, and then I was getting these futuristic things right here with this big, and we could maybe break this down to basic gestalts and say, I was viewing this through the mind of an AOL and really, because this was a life form I sketched here, and I was visualizing at the time, I wrote edifice or edificio, which means building in Spanish. But what I was visualizing was this digital life on a giant screen in Times Square. Now let's break that down to our basic gestalts. Maybe I'm not reading an AI theme, that's just my own bias. And maybe what I'm actually looking at is all the people down on the ground looking up at Christ on the cross or Christ ascending. So again, I don't know. That's the basis of the story, right? Christ hung on the cross for 3 days, or I forget. Did he hang for 3 days, or is he rose again after the third day? He rose again. Fulfillment. I remember my old catechisms here. On the third day, he rose again, fulfillment of the scriptures. There we go. So this really could not be a technological component. It could be just a breakdown of there's people down here and they're looking up at the man who's on the cross. Okay, but I had this as a broadcast or a signal or a transmission. Um, Moving on, any other highlights here in my other sessions? There are that I'll talk about here. I got on again, this is the danger of it, and I say this as a student of remote viewing, who I still consider myself a fairly new student of remote viewing. I got stuck in an AOL at first of this robot, this blocky, structured robot. It didn't feel right to me, but I had to go through it and flush it out. And then I came back to this act of God and I started to move through it to understand what the act of God was. But I had to declare here, I need to clear the visual of a blocky robot walking because there's no indications that Christ is a robot, or that's not what I'm saying at all. That I think was pure noise or me trying to interpret something, thinking machines, who knows, Terminator, who knows what was going through my mind at that point in time. I even wrote down Frankenstein. So I was able, by writing that down, I was able to separate myself from the robot imagery, which was a pretty strong imagination feeling that I was getting that I easily could have explored and gone on this whole tangent. Um, but I'm getting better at discerning, like, nope, that's my imagination. I need to step out of that. I need to declare it and go back and just focus on the sensations and describe, not name. And that's what I was able to do. So I went back to active God again. I tried again at stage 5, and I had this sense of a lightning strike downward, a movement into life. It went inwards, as you can see, it went into this guy's body here. And I had these creation themes, but it was the creation of life artificially, um, and trying to look at what it was here. I felt it was connected to human labor, or forced labor, or enslavement. Um, they're working in unison together to open or manipulate these channels. You can make those arguments here, talking about the prison planet. I'm not going there. That's not what I'm saying here. But here's the people with the logs. And obviously, Christ was a prisoner at that point as he was making his way towards where he was going to be crucified. So moving on, and then again, here I am. I had an an Asian man doing technical drawings, and really what I was looking at here. So this is obviously some kind of noise here, but I think there's possibly some value in some of this information because ultimately this life form encountered or helped create or channeled what I even said was smart energy, and then I said no, not smart, intelligent energy. So he's looking at this energy and he's watching this creation grow and come to life. And he's watching how fast this thing is just sparking together. And it's really neat. They look like little lightning streaks, like electricity in a bottle almost. And here it is. I wrote it here. It's its own smart energy. No, intelligent energy. It thinks for itself. It escapes containment and literally crawls the walls like a creeping vine, searching for a way out. And that's where I had the lawnmower man. So it's this man alone in a room and this intelligent energy is coming out of, again, this boxy like structure. This is a table here, but it's this box shaped type of structure. And this energy is just trying to escape. I think I was really trying to understand something like intelligent travel through electricity is what I was seeing. I even labeled it as Skynet physically escaping, like the spread of a virus. So, am I looking at in religious terms? Am I trying to describe the Holy Spirit? That's highly possible. I had a crown chakra connection here, and now I had this blanketing layer. This again, this was the that giant plume that I saw here, but I experienced it in a few different ways. And again, it was coming out of this box. Who does this impact? And I wrote everybody. And I thought it was important to label it, underline the word body. And I think what that means is like physical body, physical reality is what I was referring to. And here it is again. There's that cloud. It was like electric rain or electric dust or electric debris and the feeling of assimilation. And here's that sketch of the energy just pouring out of this life form here. Okay, and I had a very sci-fi theme. And I came back to the act of God in my next session. This might be my final session. I'm not sure. Maybe one more. And just looking through that, looking at more energetics here, rumbling like a fire. Um, back to these two life forms. And I had this I think I'm describing the actual shroud itself. It was pressing on the outer layer, maybe a quarter inch. It was a little bit softer, a strange feel to it. So I think I was looking at the shroud there. Again, this energy in a bottle, electricity in a bottle, flowing in a rhythmic pattern that gets much faster over time, intelligent and growing, godlike, evolving and searching. So, I mean, was this divine energy that I was trying to explain and understand here? And then what's interesting here, um, I went ahead into the future here. Describe it, where was I? Hold on. Move to a point in time that depicts the most significant long-term effects of this. So, meaning of this target, of whatever happened, what's the most significant long-term effect? So, knowing what the target is, the creation of the Shroud of Turin, which looks like it was created as, according to the data, as Christ transcended to wherever. What's the most significant long-term effects of this? All right, and here I am getting drones now. I'm not saying drones are tied to Christ. I think that's noise right there. But we had this workforce, right? The labor camps. They were tired, they were flat. What was life like after Jesus died for the people? Or is this going out into the future, showing here's where this will ultimately lead to? And I drew this city, this glowing golden city. Is it radiation or is it tech? I asked. Or is this something spiritual? I'm asking that now. And I didn't write this down, but if you've ever watched the series The 100, they have they refer to the city of light, which is a city, spoiler alert, but the show's been out for over a decade. It's a city that exists within an AI, very similar to the Gnostic stuff, right? So maybe again, this is my imagination. It's a topic I'm very interested in. But what is curious is that Coral has a very similar glowing sketch of, she didn't label it a city, just these tall pillars, and she colored them with this brilliant, beautiful silver. Um, so maybe there's something to that. Maybe this is the afterlife. Maybe this is base reality or the next level up. Maybe it's just noise in my imagination. I don't know. Um, yeah, people were on the outskirts looking in at this location from a distance. It felt futuristic, but not too far away to me. All right, anything else that I want to share? Okay, looking at more energetics here. This cloud moving through, one, I was looking at it as this dust cloud, but then again, I had two images that I was competing with here. And the second one was a very clear, wavy energy, like heat waves. And I wrote, it has a matrix feel to it, an invisible energy grid. The air seems the air seems distorted as like in a heat wave. The energy is or was connected to a structure or object, but has moved beyond that, moving away from it. And here's the life. Energy was pouring out of this life or figure. It diminished, it drains, and became less, and he became less physically. Pain, but not really. It felt like life too from the previous sessions. So again, I'm moving to that optimal point in space and time to describe the location. I didn't have much luck with this, but I did get that stopping feeling again as I was scrolling through that. So let's see if there's anything else that I have here. Um, this was just looking at this energy, and this life here touched this energy and it had this spark. And as I did it, my hands started to tingle. And I forgot about this until this morning. I even had a dream that my hands were tingly from something, and I think it was tied to this session here. Uh, he's like, it's like he creates this smart energy. And I wrote, if this were a movie, the energy would become the monster. It's like he touches it and then it zaps him, but he has such love and admiration for this creation, this divine spark. Um, and then this is what happens. And I think what I sketched here is probably the really a reflection of the shroud, right? You've got a very clear face and then this just blurry image here. But I wrote a transition from physical to etheric, and I wrote AOL digital. And I think I was probably trying to just interpret transcendence. But and based on what I've looked at with the other sessions too, I think that this person died, but their death was different. I don't think they died and their body was left there. I think his whole physical body zapped and materialized into another reality. I had this data about being androgynous or gay or a sense of the sexual organs being burned off and no longer needed. That was very strange to me. I am by no means saying I had data that Jesus was gay. I think it's interesting that I wrote that down. I think what's more important is that the sense that the organs were being burned off and no longer needed. I think that was just communicating a transcendent to a level where that's no longer needed. But Coral, which is what I find very interesting, she had she described this person as being a sexual being, a heterosexual being. So, and I think I possibly saw some elements in her session. I don't want to speak for her of maybe even some tantra or some sex magic. Um, so I don't know. I don't know what all the data means. Again, let me read this last part here. The life was calm and quiet, but has had this internal perversion. Something was off, like a secret that life keeps. He won't fully acknowledge it within himself, but knows it is there and fully aware of its intentions. But he's not realized the intensity and far-reaching impact. He does have an ego, a God complex. I'm going to release this to the world. I'll show them. And I'm not saying that, I mean, from the accounts that we have, Christ was a humble man or a humble son of God, depending on your perspective. But that's just what I was writing down here. There's emotional pain in his past, rejection, the sense of being told he's not good enough. Obviously, they hung him on the cross. Maybe his work was stolen from him. And then here's what I ended with, and it was this ball of energy with like this arm and this head on top of it. It was just curious, it was learning, and predatory, deceptive, dangerous. It can be cute, but it will kill you to get what it wants to protect itself like a snake. Um, so I don't know. I, I I know I've said this a lot. There's a lot of noise in my session, I think. Um, I have no way of proving it. It's again, that's what happens when you work a woo target. But there's just so much for me that I th find fascinating to think about. And maybe there are aspects of this that are simply me not filtering out my imagination, and which is why we got this AI matrix theme. 100% possible. I tried to disclose all my bias in this podcast, which was my goal, because I don't want to sit here and quote gospel. But the value for me is it's such a fun and valuable thought experiment for me. What if? What would it mean? How does this fit in my current worldview? So it's given me a lot to think about. So even if my data, or my, let me say, even if my interpretation of my data is way off, I'm okay with that because in this moment, I'm taking value from the experience and from my current perceptions. And I am a believer that certain truths that we hold close to ourselves serve a purpose, serve a specific purpose for us at certain points in our life and certain points in our journey. And sometimes, if we think about how much we've grown and changed through these spiritual journeys, something that we were sure was right and true at one point in time, later we come to find out, no, maybe that wasn't. But it And sometimes that realization is devastating and paradigm shifting, and sometimes it gradually just falls off. And I like to look back on that though and go, well, when I believed that, that got me to this question and that got me to this point, and that was necessary for me to believe that thing, even though now I'm at a position where I know that's not true. There was value at that stage in my journey of looking at things because I couldn't understand the world from this perspective until I looked at it through this lens. And then this lens fades away and you're like, oh, that's not right. And you get a new vantage, you get a new perspective. So maybe I'm just rambling, trying to justify my data and sharing my anxiety. I really don't, I'm not. I just feel that I don't ever want to put stuff out and say, this is it. This is true because I remote viewed it. No, I want to understand my own process. I want to understand my own mind and where I trailed off because I only want to keep getting better as a viewer. So if you're still watching, I thank you. And I'd love to hear any feedback you have. Um, be polite. You guys always are. But I'd love to hear any feedback that you have on this in terms of, my specific analysis and theories, how it fits with the rest of the team's data, and maybe any specific knowledge you have on just Christ, Jesus, religion, whatever, and how it fits to our data. That'd be great. That'd be helpful. So, again, I thank you. I thank you all for your kindness, for your support of all the work we do here at the Future Forecasting Group, and allowing me to have these opportunities to talk to all of you about this, about things like this, and to have these experiences. A big thank you to Daz, who is just such, number one, he's just such a kind, kind guy. And the knowledge and wisdom and mentorship and guidance he offers and what he brings to our community at Future Forecasting. I'm so grateful. And to the incredible women that we work with on the Rabbit Hole team. We've already we've already got the next project in the works, which I'll be doing that session in the next day or two, my first session. So we'll see where the rabbit hole leads us next. It's going to be another fun adventure. So, my friends, on behalf of the Future Forecasting Group, I'm Dennis Nappy II. Thanks for watching.